Do you remember that feeling back in, what, 2008, 2009? That kind of knot in your stomach,
Oh, yeah.
that sense of unease, like the ground was shifting under the economies?
Definitely. It felt like it came out of nowhere for a lot of people.
Exactly, like a bolt from the blue, just this sudden, devastating event. But what if I told you that these big economic disasters, they aren't always external shocks?
Yeah.
Like, not always a meteor hitting the planet, economically speaking,
Uh-huh.
but maybe something, I don't know, inherent,
Yeah.
like built into market economies themselves.
That's a fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling idea.
Right. Well, today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. There's this groundbreaking paper. It's called Endogenous Disasters.
By Petrosky Nadeau, Zhang and Kuhn. Yeah, it made some waves.
It really did. And it's not just another chat about recessions. It gets into this really deep concept. The idea that market economies might be, well, intrinsically unstable.
Inherently unstable, yeah. That
Yeah.
they have the internal workings to generate their own rare but really severe downturns.
Which totally challenges a lot of the standard thinking, right? Those
Yeah.
conventional macroeconomic models.
Absolutely. They, frankly, really struggled to explain just how deep the Great Recession was.
And how long it took to recover.
Exactly. The slow recovery, too. So these authors, they went back to a pretty standard labor market model, the Diamond-Mortensen-Pissarides model, usually called DMP.
Right, DMP. I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a workhorse model, but they solved it using a really sophisticated, globally nonlinear algorithm. And what they found was, well, that these rare disasters aren't just possible, they're endogenous. They come from within the model.
Wow. Okay. So our mission today for this deep dive is to really unpack that, to take these pretty complex economic ideas and, give you listening a shortcut to understanding what's going on.
These surprising mechanisms at play.
Exactly. How something as basic as, like, how people look for jobs and how firms hire can, under the right or maybe wrong conditions, send the whole economy
Off a cliff.
off a cliff. Yeah. So get ready for, hopefully, some aha moments that might really shift how you think about economic stability.
It definitely challenges some assumptions.
Okay, let's unpack this then. We just lived through the Great Recession, 2007, 2009. Before this paper came along, what were the really big questions economists were wrestling with afterwards? What could the existing models explain properly?
Yeah, that's the perfect starting point because the Great Recession really did expose some pretty significant cracks in, modern macroeconomics, the standard models at the time, the DSGE models, dynamic, stochastic, general equilibrium.
Right, the workhorses.
The workhorses, exactly, used by central banks, governments, everywhere. They largely failed on two key aspects of the Great Recession. First, as you said, the depth.
It was just so deep.
So deep. This wasn't just a mild downturn. And second, the incredibly slow recovery. We all felt how long it took for jobs to come back, for growth to pick up.
Yeah, years.
Years. Now, these DSGE models, they were actually pretty good at explaining, typical business cycles, those more regular, milder ups and downs.
The normal ebb and flow.
Right. But when faced with something of the scale and, crucially, the persistence of the Great Recession, they didn't really have the internal gears to explain it properly. They kind of hit a wall.
So when we talk about these rare severe events, these disasters, is there like a formal definition economists use? It sounds pretty dramatic.
It is dramatic. And yes, there is a precise definition. It goes back to researchers like Reitz and later Barrow. They define these rare disasters not just as any old recession. The bar is quite high.
Okay.
It's a cumulative fractional decline in per capita consumption or output of at least 10%.
10%. Wow.
That's a lot.
It is a huge amount. Think about that, a 10% drop or more in what you personally or, the country as a whole produces or consumes per person.
That's not just a bad quarter. No way. That's a significant, sustained hit. It affects everyone, every business. It distinguishes a regular downturn from something truly catastrophic, the kind of event that reshapes the economy for years, maybe even decades.
Okay, so the old models couldn't really handle these 10% plus disasters. They struggled with the depth, the slow recovery.
Yeah.
What's the fundamental shift this paper introduces? How do they change the game?
This is really the core breakthrough. It's a big conceptual leap. Historically, many studies that tried to incorporate big downturns used what they called exogenous disasters.
Exogenous meaning? from outside.
Exactly, from outside. They basically just assumed that some massive negative shock, like sudden drop in productivity or, some huge unexplained disturbance hit the economy externally.
Like the meteor strike idea.
Precisely. The disaster was something that happened to the economy, and the model just tracked the reaction.
So the economy was passive in that view.
Right. But this paper shows something fundamentally different. It takes that standard DMP search model of unemployment, solves it really accurately with this nonlinear method, and finds that it endogenously gives rise to rare disasters from within.
Okay. And the shocks themselves, are they unusual in this model?
That's the crucial part. No, the shocks in their model are actually pretty standard, pretty normal. They're homoscedastic.
Homoscedastic. Okay, break that down for us. Why is it important that the shocks aren't special?
Good question. Homoscedastic just means the variability, the size of the random fluctuations hitting the economy is constant over time.
Like a steady drum beat, not sudden loud bangs.
Exactly like a steady drumbeat. The economy gets these continuous, small, ordinary pokes, but the pokes aren't suddenly getting way bigger or more unpredictable. Productivity follows a standard, well-behaved process. It's not assumed to suddenly tank.
Okay.
The profound part is, even with just these ordinary garden variety fluctuations, the model economy can generate these extraordinary outcomes, these rare, severe disasters. Not because of some freak external event, but because of its own internal structure, the way the labor market works.
That's kind of unsettling, isn't it? The idea that the seeds of collapse might always be there, just waiting.
It is a bit unsettling. It implies we can't just brace for external hits. We have to understand the internal fault lines, the mechanisms within the economy that can amplify small shocks into huge ones.
So it changes how economists should think about stability.
Absolutely. It shifts the focus. Instead of just building defenses against external meteors, we need to understand the internal plumbing, the self-reinforcing loops. Instability isn't just something that happens to the economy, it's something the economy can generate.
Which suggests policy might need to focus more on
What?
what? Internal resilience.
Exactly. Strengthening the system from within, making it less prone to these amplification effects rather than just reacting after an external shock hits.
Okay, it's a huge perspective shift. So if these disasters are endogenous, what are the specific internal ingredients? The paper talks about two key pillars, right, within the labor market.
Yes, exactly. They identify two crucial factors that, when they interact, create the conditions for these disasters.
Yeah.
You can think of them as two pillars holding up this potential instability.
Okay.
The first is what they call inertial wages.
Inertial weights.
And the second is the downward rigidity of hiring costs, which comes from something called a trading externality.
Okay, let's dig into those.
Yeah.
Pillar one, inertial wages. What does inertial mean here, and why is it so critical?
Inertial basically means sticky. Wages don't adjust downwards as quickly or as much as you might expect, especially when the economy goes sour. They resist falling.
Okay.
In the model, this happens when there's a relatively high flow value of unemployment activities. They call this parameter B.
And B isn't just unemployment benefits, right? It's broader.
Much broader. That's key. Yes, unemployment insurance is part of it. But B also captures the value of, say, home production, fixing things, cooking, childcare.
Stuff you do when not formally employed.
Right, or income from side gigs, self-employment. And crucially, it also includes the value of leisure itself. Or the flip side, the disutility of work, the effort and cost of working versus not working.
So if B is high, being unemployed isn't economically devastating, it's a better fallback.
Exactly. You have a relatively strong fallback position. And if that's the case, workers have less incentive to accept big wage cuts when times get tough. This makes wages stickier, more inertial.
Okay, so wages stay high. What's the impact?
The critical impact of a high B is that it implies, realistically, that firms operate with relatively small profit margins in normal times.
Ah, okay. There isn't much fat to trim.
Precisely. Wages are already a big chunk of output. So when the economy takes a hit, say, productivity falls around, these inertial wages don't fall as much or as fast as output does.
So revenues drop, but costs stay high.
Which means those already small profits get squeezed disproportionately. It's a much bigger hit to profitability than if wages were perfectly flexible.
And there's historical evidence for this kind of wage stickiness.
Oh, absolutely. The paper highlights this. During the Great Depression, for example, this wasn't just theory, it was observed reality.
Like where?
Well, look at Britain. Research showed persistently high unemployment, like 14% on average for nearly 2 decades, and it was linked to quite generous unemployment benefits back then, which exceeded 50% of wages by the 1930s.
Creating a high B value.
Right, reducing the incentive to take lower wages. And in the US, during the Depression, we saw real wages actually increase for a while.
Increase. How?
Because nominal wages, the dollar amount fell much slower than prices were falling due to deflation. So your actual purchasing power went up, even as the economy tanked.
Good for the worker who kept their job, but bad for the employer.
Devastating for employers. It squeezed profits even more, making them less likely to hire or even keep existing workers. Even some government policies back then, like Hoover encouraging firms to maintain nominal wages.
Inadvertently made things worse.
With deflation, yes, it led to real wage increases of over 10% in manufacturing by 1931, adding fuel to the fire. We saw similar patterns internationally, too. France, Germany, Italy, real wages rising or staying stubbornly high during the early slump.
Wow. Okay, so that's inertial wages, pillar one. Pillar two was about hiring costs. Something about a trading externality and downward rigidity. Sounds complex.
It is a bit more complex, but it's rooted in how real labor markets work, not the frictionless ideal. So in the DMP model, finding a job isn't instant. Firms post vacancies, unemployed workers, say search. A matching function determines how quickly matches happen.
Like a job market friction.
Exactly. A key measure is labor market tightness, theta, which is just the ratio of vacancies to unemployed workers, VU.
Yeah.
When tightness is high, lots of jobs, few workers, it's harder for a firm to fill a spot. The vacancy filling rate is low, hiring is slow and costly.
Makes sense.
When tightness is low, few jobs, many workers' firms fill spots quickly. The filling rate is high.
Okay, so how do costs fit in?
The paper models the unit cost per vacancy like this. Kappa equals kappa 0 plus kappa 1.
Well, okay, Greek letters, break it down.
Think of kappa 0 as the basic advertising cost, proportional costs. Kappa 1 is like fixed costs you pay after hiring, onboarding, training, admin stuff.
Right.
And is that probability of filling the vacancy. So the total marginal cost of actually hiring someone is roughly the advertising cost divided by how easy it is to fill the job, plus those fixed post-hiring costs. The formula is kappa plus kappa.
Got it. Advertising cost adjusted for difficulty plus fixed costs. So where's the externality?
Here's the cool part, the trading externality. It behaves differently in booms and busts. In an expansion, lots of firms are hiring, competing for fewer workers.
High tightness.
Right. If your frame posts one more vacancy, it actually makes it slightly harder for all other firms and even your other vacancies to be filled.
Like fishing in a crowded pond. My extra line makes it harder for everyone.
Perfect analogy. This externality raises the marginal hiring cost for everyone, which naturally slows down job creation, makes expansions gradual. Firms are cautious.
Okay. But what about recessions? You said that's where it gets really interesting for disasters.
Exactly. In a recession, you have the opposite. Many unemployed, few vacancies, low tightness.
Easy to fill a spot, so cut is high.
Right. So the individual firm finds it easy, but now the congestion affects the workers, not the firms. One extra vacancy posted by a firm has almost no impact on how quickly other firms fill their vacancies because there are so many seekers available.
Ah, the externality is weak on the firm side in a recession.
Precisely. Because of this asymmetry, marginal hiring costs rise quickly in expansions, and here's the key. They decline only slowly in recessions.
That's the downward rigidity.
That's the downward rigidity. The costs just don't fall enough to incentivize hiring when you get it most. And those fixed costs, the kappa 1, they reinforce this by adding a constant floor. Even if finding someone is instant, is near 1, you still have that fixed kappa 1 cost for training, etc. So the total marginal cost can't fall below that fixed amount.
So even with tons of available workers, firms face these rigid costs that don't drop enough to really kickstart hiring. Like the wheels are stuck even if you have the manpower.
Great analogy again. The system lacks flexibility downwards on the hiring cost side. And importantly, this whole mechanism, the trading externality, the resulting rigid costs, it comes endogenously from the search model. It's not in the simpler neoclassical models that assume frictionless hiring.
Okay, so we have wages that don't fall enough, squeezing profits, and hiring costs that also don't fall enough, stifling job creation, even with lots of unemployed people. How do these two work together to push an economy towards disaster? Walk us through that vicious cycle.
Right. It's the combination that's so potent. It creates this devastating cascade, especially when you get a series of negative shocks, even small ones.
Okay, step by step.
Step 1. The economy starts with those relatively small firm profits because of that high B, the high value of not working.
Thin margins.
Thin margins. Step 2. Negative shocks hit, productivity dips. Those already small profits shrink even more.
Squeezed from the top line.
Exactly. Step 3. Those inertial wages kick in hard. They don't fall much, so they eat even deeper into the shrinking profits. Firms are squeezed from both revenue and cost sides.
The vice tightens.
Right. Step 4. Now add the rigid hiring costs. They fail to decline significantly to offset the profit squeeze. Even with many unemployed, the actual cost to the firm of creating and filling a job stays stubbornly high.
So no incentive to hire.
Precisely. Job creation flows just get stifled, they dry up. Meanwhile, step 5. Jobs are still being destroyed at some background rate. People retire, quit, firms fail.
So outflow continues, inflow stops.
And the result is aggregate employment just falls off a cliff. That's the disaster. It's not a gradual slide. It's a rapid acceleration downwards because hiring stops dead while destruction continues.
Wow, that paints a very clear picture. Is there a way to visualize this rigidity?
Yes, figure 4 in the paper does this beautifully. It compares economies with small profits, high B 0.85, versus large profits, low B 0.4.
Okay.
In panel A, the high B case, when productivity is low, like in a slump, the vacancy filling rate is close to 1. Firms can find workers almost instantly.
So finding workers isn't the bottleneck.
No, but then panel B shows that the marginal cost of hiring in that same scenario is essentially flat. It hits a floor, +1, and can't go lower. That's the downward rigidity visualized.
The cost won't drop to stimulate hiring.
Exactly. Now look at panel C and D, the low B case with large profits. Here, the filling rate is sensitive to employment. As employment falls, costs can and do fall significantly.
Providing a counter-cyclical boost.
Right. It stimulates hiring when it's needed, dampening the downturn.
Yeah.
It shows how drastically the firm's hiring decision changes based on underlying profits and labor market structure. One system bends, the other breaks.
That makes so much sense visually. Okay, this theory is powerful. But how do we know if these theoretical disasters actually look like the real ones? How do they build and test the model against historical reality?
This is where they really roll up their sleeves. They didn't just build a theory, they calibrated it meticulously to real-world data, using monthly frequency to capture dynamics properly.
What kind of data?
They used long-run historical data. For output and consumption, they used the Barrow-Ursua cross-country panel, extending it to 2013. That covers a huge sweep of history. For the U.S. labor market, they used a specific U.S. monthly unemployment series from 1929 to 2013, covering the Great Depression and everything since.
So nearly a century of data. How do they calibrate? What parameters do they set?
They have to set key parameters, the model's dials, to match observed facts. Things like the discount factor to match asset prices, productivity, persistence, and volatility to match output growth patterns. Crucially, the worker bargaining weight was set to get a realistic wage elasticity, how much wages respond to productivity changes. They got 0.51, very close to the observed 0.47.
So wages behave realistically.
Yes. And then there's B, that flow value of unemployment. They set it at 0.85. Remember, this includes home production, leisure value, etc.
Yeah.
This specific value implies a profits to output ratio in the model of 8.6%, which is remarkably close to the actual U.S. average of 9.1% from 1929-2013.
So getting B right was critical for getting profits right.
Absolutely pivotal. Too low a B, profits are huge, the economy's too stable, too high, profits vanish, it's always collapsing. They tuned B to match reality, creating that realistic vulnerability where small profits meet wage inertia.
What about job separation rates, vacancy costs?
Calibrated too. Job separation rate set at 4%, consistent with labor market studies. Vacancy costs adjusted to match the average U.S. unemployment rate. Model gets 6.3% to 7.1% data, and its volatility, model 23.4%, EA's a 19.8% data. It's a careful balancing act to make the model world resemble the real world.
That sounds incredibly thorough. You mentioned they checked something called the Beveridge curve, too. What is that, and why was checking it important?
The Beveridge curve. It's fundamental in labor economics. It simply plots the relationship between the unemployment rate and the job vacancy rate. Normally, it slopes downwards.
High unemployment, low vacancies, and vice versa.
Exactly. It reflects the efficiency of the labor market's matching process, how well it connects job seekers and available jobs.
So what did they find when they look at it over that long 1929-2013 period?
This is a critical finding, shown in their figure 1. They found remarkable stability in the U.S. Beveridge curve over almost a century. The data points from the extreme periods, the Great Depression, the WWII demobilization, don't fly off onto some completely different curve.
They just trace out more extreme parts of the same curve.
Exactly. They form a natural extension into regions of very high unemployment, low vacancies, depression, or very low unemployment, high vacancies, post-WWII.
Why is that stability so important for their model?
It suggests the fundamental matching technology itself didn't radically break down or change during these crises. The economy moved along this stable relationship, pushed to its extremes. The model needs to replicate this, especially that huge 78% drop in the vacancy rate during the Depression. The stable Beveridge curve validates the model's core assumption about a consistent underlying labor market structure, even under duress.
Okay, so the model is built, calibrated, matches key labor market facts like the Beveridge curve. The big test. Does it actually generate disasters that look like the real historical ones? How well does it match the frequency, size, duration?
Right, the ultimate test. They use that same peak-to-trough method as borrower SUA. Identify simulated periods where output or consumption falls cumulatively by at least 10%. And importantly, they adjusted the historical data for trend growth to make a fair comparison with their no-growth model, which actually makes the matching harder.
Raises the bar. So what were the results?
The results, shown in Table 4, are pretty compelling. For output disasters, the model predicts a 5% probability. The data adjusted shows a 7.8%, so a bit low in frequency,
Okay.
but the average size. Model predicts 22.2%. Data is almost exactly 22%. It nails the severity.
Wow. And duration.
Also very close. Model average is 4.4 years, data is 3.7 years. So for output, it might slightly underpredict how often they happen, but it gets the severity and length spot on.
What about consumption disasters?
Similar story, but maybe a bit weaker on frequency. Model probability is 2.9%, data is 8.6%, so it underestimates the frequency more for consumption.
But the size and duration?
Again, remarkably good. Average size in the model is 25.6%, data is 23.2%. Duration is 4.9 years in the model, 3.8 years in the data.
So the overall picture is?
Yeah. The model does a fantastic job replicating the severity and persistence of these rare extreme events, even if it slightly underestimates the frequency, especially for consumption. And Figure 3 shows the whole distribution of disaster sizes and durations in the model looks very similar to the data, including capturing things like power law patterns for size. It's not just getting the averages, it's capturing the character of these events.
That's quite impressive. Now, if these disasters are endogenous, it makes you wonder, what parts of the system are most sensitive? If we could tweak the economy's settings, theoretically, what would happen? The paper did some comparative statics, right? Changing one parameter at a time.
Yes, and these experiments are super insightful. They show which levers matter most for disaster risk.
Okay, what did they find? Let's start with B, that flow value of unemployment.
Right, B is crucial. When they lowered B from the baseline 0.85 down towards 0.4, the results were dramatic. It significantly reduces disaster probability and size.
Lower B means less value in being unemployed.
Exactly, which makes wages more flexible. They fall more easily in downturns. This gives firms more incentive to hire, counteracting job destruction and dampening disasters. With B0.4, disaster risk drops significantly. It really highlights how central that parameter and the wage inertia it creates is.
Makes sense. What about the job separation rate, Alice?
Lowering as the rate jobs are destroyed also reduces disaster probability and size. If fewer jobs disappear naturally, the economy is less likely to tip over the edge when hiring slows down. Fewer leaks in the bucket.
Okay. And those fixed hiring costs, capital one.
Removing them also reduces disaster risk. This shows those fixed onboarding training costs really do reinforce the downward rigidity of overall hiring costs, making disasters worse. Removing them adds flexibility.
Interesting. What about the matching efficiency itself, that curvature parameter, iota?
Reducing the curvature, making the market more frictional, less efficient at matching, actually raises disaster probability slightly. More friction hampers job creation, making recovery harder and disasters more likely.
And finally, workers' bargaining power, eta.
Increasing worker bargaining power also raises disaster probability. More power can lead to output disaster probability jumps to 10%, higher than data, consumption probability to 7.5%. It seems that if home production is a good alternative to market work, especially if they're not easily substitutable, it keeps that ZZT high, reinforcing wage inertia even more. A better fallback makes wages stickier, making the economy more prone to collapse.
Wow, that is counterintuitive, but makes sense with the wage inertia channel. What about adding capital, machines, buildings?
The capital model, Table 7. Firms now use labor and capital they invest. There are costs to adjusting capital. Again, disaster dynamics remain robust. Output probability 9.5%, consumption 5.3%. Sizes are a bit smaller than data.
So capital acts like a buffer, maybe.
Exactly. It has a buffering effect. Firms can adjust investment, maybe substitute a bit between capital and labor. This dampens investment swings, slightly amplifies consumption swings, but it doesn't kill the underlying labor market-driven disaster mechanism. That core instability from wages and hiring costs is still the main driver.
Okay. And the last big one was using more sophisticated preferences, recursive utility.
Yes, the recursive utility model, Table 8. This uses Epstein-Zinn preferences, which let you separate risk aversion from the elasticity of intertemporal substitution. This is really important for matching asset prices, which simpler models often fail at.
And did the disasters still happen?
They did. Disaster dynamics remain substantial. Output probability 4.6%, size 23.4%, consumption probability 2.5%, size 28.8%. Sizes are right in line with, or even bigger than, the data. The mechanism persists.
But you said this helps with asset prices.
Yes, this is where recursive utility really pays off. With high risk aversion, the model does a really good job matching key asset price facts. It gets an equity premium of 4.5%, very close to the data's 4.7%. Stock market volatility is 15.8%, also close to the data's 20%.
That's impressive for a model focused on labor markets.
It is. There are still some mismatches, like the model predicts a higher interest rate and lower interest rate volatility than we see in reality, partly because it doesn't model sovereign default risk. But here's a fascinating insight, echoing earlier work. Risk aversion is critical for getting asset prices right, like the equity premium, but it seems almost unimportant for the real quantities output, consumption, unemployment, and the disaster probability sizes themselves.
So people's aversion to risk drives financial market pricing, but not necessarily the physical mechanics of these economic collapses.
That seems to be the implication. The real economy disasters are driven more by those labor market frictions, the wage inertia, and hiring rigidity, regardless of how risk-averse people are. It decouples financial market drivers from real economy drivers to some extent.
And you mentioned it solves a puzzle about dividends.
Right, a side benefit. Many models struggle because they predict dividends should be countercyclical, fall more than output in recessions. But here, because wage inertia acts like operating leverage on profits,
Making profits swing more wildly than output.
exactly, profits become more procyclical than output. This is enough to make dividends procyclical too, matching reality, solving that puzzle. It shows how these labor frictions connect the real economy and finance in subtle ways.
Okay, this has been incredibly detailed. Let's pull back. What does this all mean? This deep dive suggests market economies might have this built-in tendency towards crisis. What are the big takeaways for economists, policymakers, and just for us trying to make sense of it all?
Yeah, there are some major takeaways. The research makes at least 4 key contributions. One, it really quantifies these previously overlooked disaster dynamics hiding within the standard labor market search model. It goes beyond just unemployment levels.
Okay.
2, it fundamentally shifts the disaster literature by showing these events can be entirely endogenous, born from the system itself, not just external hits.
A huge conceptual shift.
Huge. 3, it offers a concrete, plausible mechanism, that combo of wage inertia and trading externality rigid hiring costs for understanding devastating events like the Great Depression through a labor market lens.
A specific engine for the crisis.
Right. And 4, it highlights the absolute necessity of using nonlinear dynamics and more sophisticated solution methods. Simple linear models just completely miss these cliff effects.
But we should still be clear, right?
Yeah.
While the model shows how disasters happen, the propagation, it doesn't necessarily pinpoint the initial spark.
Absolutely correct. That's a crucial distinction. The model is about the propagation mechanism. The productivity shocks they use are just a stand-in, a modeling device for whatever initial impulse hits the economy.
So for the Great Depression, the impulse might have been monetary policy mistakes, banking crises.
Exactly. The consensus points to things like the money supply collapse, banking panics, deflation, the gold standard. Those were the likely impulses. The model then shows how those impulses could get amplified into such a massive, prolonged disaster via these labor market mechanisms. The borrower-SUA data itself includes disasters from all sorts of origins: economic, wars, natural catastrophes. The model explains the economic amplification, regardless of the initial trigger.
Understanding the engine, even if the spark varies.
Got it. So, given this engine, what are the next steps for research? And what are the policy implications? Can we actually do anything about endogenous disasters?
The paper points towards exciting future research, like embedding this labor market structure into monetary models to see how central banks might interact with these dynamics,
Could policy make it better or worse?
potentially. Also, studying the interaction with financial frictions, credit markets, borrowing constraints, which we know are hugely important in real crises, combining labor and financial frictions could be very powerful.
And for policy now?
Well, the model clearly shows the market outcome isn't socially optimal. It violates the Hosios condition.
Meaning the free market doesn't get it quite right on its own here.
Exactly, which opens the door for policy. And the comparative statics give clues. Remember, disaster risk rose with B, the flow value of unemployment.
Yeah.
That implies that making unemployment benefits procyclical might actually reduce disaster risk. Procyclical, meaning lower benefits in good times, maybe higher in bad. How does that help?
Lowering benefits, or the overall value B, during good times would reduce that baseline wage inertia, making the economy inherently less vulnerable when shocks hit. It makes wages potentially more flexible downwards. Then you could still provide a safety net in the crisis itself. It's about tuning B over the cycle.
That's a controversial idea politically.
It is, but the model suggests it could enhance stability. It complements other ideas like hiring subsidies, which directly lower hiring costs, or layoff taxes, which slow job destruction. The underlying theme is policy aimed at increasing wage and hiring cost flexibility, especially downwards, could make the system more resilient to these internally generated collapses.
So wrapping this up, after this deep dive, it seems market economies aren't necessarily the stable systems we might assume. They might actually contain the seeds of their own dramatic collapses.
It's a shift from thinking only about external shocks to recognizing the internal dynamics that interplay of sticky wages, rigid hiring costs can be enough.
The economy potentially being its own worst enemy.
In a sense, yes. Its own structure creates vulnerabilities.
And understanding this shift from exogenous to endogenous disasters, it's profound. It changes how we need to think about stability, looking inward at the mechanics of work, hiring, wages.
Right. And for you listening, it's not just academic theory. It shapes how we might approach policy, how we think about economic resilience, even maybe how we plan individually in a world where the next big downturn might be brewing internally.
So the final thought to leave everyone with. If market economies are intrinsically unstable, if they can generate their own disasters from the very fabric of how we work and hire, what is our role as individuals, as policymakers, as a society in navigating or maybe even trying to mitigate these seemingly internal crises?
It's a huge question. It challenges a lot of conventional wisdom.
And definitely invites us all to look much, much deeper.